If you've ever driven the highways of Texas at night, you know there's something off about them. Long, empty stretches of blacktop where the radio goes dead, headlights flicker, and shadows move where no shadows should be. These aren't just ghost stories. These are true accounts from truckers, travelers, and locals who swore they'd never speak of what they saw again. But tonight, you're going to hear them. If you're brave enough to stay with me till the end, make sure you like this video. It helps these dark stories reach more horror fans like you. Please comment on where you're watching from, because every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is tuning in. Let me know which story haunted you the most, and of course, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep these terrifying tales alive. Now, let's begin. It was a little after 2 in the morning when I saw him. A barefoot man walking along the shoulder of a Highway 90, somewhere past Del Rio. The fog was thick that night, the kind that makes the mountains feel like they're breathing. My headlights caught his pale ankles first, then the outline of a torn button-up shirt, wet and clinging to his ribs. I slowed down, thinking maybe he'd been in an accident. The nearest town was at least 20 miles behind me, and I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. The road curved between black walls of trees, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound your car makes, the hum of the engine, the hiss of the tires on wet asphalt, the rattle of a loose keychain. When I pulled up beside him, he turned his head, squinting through the fog. "Hey, you all right?" I called out through the open window. He stepped closer, barefoot on the gravel, and I noticed how raw his feet were. Cut up, dark with mud. His breath came in short bursts, like he'd been running. He looked to be in his 40s, thin, sunken eyes. "My car broke down a few miles back," he said quietly, voice low, like he was afraid to be heard. "Want me to call someone? I've got signal for a bit." He hesitated, then shook his head. No, I just need to get back before she notices I'm gone." I blinked. Before who notices? He didn't answer, just looked past me into the fog behind the car. His pupils were wide. I thought maybe he was drunk or scared. I reached over to unlock the passenger door. "All right, get in. I'll take you to the next exit." He hesitated again, then climbed in. He smelled like wet wood and something metallic, like old blood. The inside of my car fogged up instantly from his damp clothes. I kept the heat on low, eyes flicking between the road and the man beside me. After a few miles, he started mumbling. "She doesn't sleep much anymore." I told her I'd fix it, but she keeps watching the window. Always watching. I didn't know what to say. The road narrowed into a stretch where both sides dropped into foggy hollows, no guardrails, no lights. The trees pressed in close, dark shapes slipping past the corners of my vision. I checked the rearview mirror once just to make sure no one was behind me. The reflection caught my headlights bouncing off the fog, and in the faint glow I saw his face, pale, eyes sunken, mouth slightly open like he was whispering. Then he looked up and met his own reflection. For a split second, I swear his expression changed. Not fear, not surprise, just this sudden, awful sadness. And then he was gone. I didn't hear a sound, no door, no movement. Just the hollow space beside me, empty and damp. I slammed the brakes. The car fishtailed slightly on the wet road. When I turned, the seat was soaked, like rainwater had been poured over it. I got out, flashlight in hand, scanning the road. Nothing. Not even footprints. Just the fog curling over the asphalt, swallowing the beam of light. I stood there until my hands started shaking. The air smelled like wet cedar and gasoline. In the distance, through the mist, I thought I saw a shape. A parked car, maybe, but when I walked toward it, it dissolved into nothing. I got back in the car and drove. Windows down, air burning cold against my face. I didn't stop again until I saw the first gas station light on the edge of town. Inside, the clerk didn't even look up when I walked in. I bought a coffee and sat there under the flickering fluorescent light, staring at the wet imprint on the passenger seat, still dark with moisture. I didn't sleep that night, and for the next few days, I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the fog, of headlights and nerves. But the smell in my car wouldn't go away. It wasn't mildew, it was something older, something that clung to the air no matter how much I cleaned. And when I finally went back to Highway 90, to the place where I'd stopped, the asphalt was cracked, half swallowed by weeds. There was no sign of a wreck, no tire marks, just an old fence leaning toward the valley, and a dirt path leading down into the trees. I don't know what made me do it, guilt, maybe, or curiosity, but a week later, I drove that same stretch again. I told myself I was just trying to make sense of it, to see what I'd missed. The fog was thinner this time, but the air still carried that cold, damp smell. When I found the spot, I pulled over and followed the dirt path down the slope. The ground was soft with leaves, the kind that sink under your boots with a wet sigh. I walked maybe half a mile before I saw the cabin. It was old, half collapsed under its own roof, boards blackened with rot. The windows were dark, one of them covered with a torn bedsheet. There were beer bottles scattered in the weeds, a rusted car door leaning against a tree. The silence down there was heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I almost turned back, but then I saw the mailbox beside the porch. The name on it was still faintly visible under the rust. K. Danner. That name stuck in my head. I didn't know why. Inside, the air was thick with mold and the sour smell of damp wood. The floor creaked under my weight, and somewhere above a slow drip echoed, water leaking from the ceiling. The living room was frozen in time, a recliner facing an old television, half buried in dust. A coffee mug still on the table, rim lined with dried residue. On the wall hung a family photo. A man, a woman, and a little girl. The man's face looked familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. He was the one I'd picked up. The woman beside him was staring directly at the camera, eyes cold, almost lifeless. Her hand rested on his shoulder like a weight. I stepped back. Something in the next room shifted, soft and slow, like fabric dragging across wood. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself the place was just falling apart. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something else. A trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, across the floor, straight to the spot where I stood. Bare footprints. They stopped right in front of me. I bolted out the door, nearly slipping on the wet steps. I didn't look back until I was halfway up the hill, breathing hard. From there, through the trees, I saw the faint outline of the cabin. One of the curtains moved, just slightly, as if someone had brushed past it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that photo. I searched the name online when I got home. Kenneth Danner, 42, from Del Rio, reported missing 3 years ago after a domestic dispute. Police had searched the hills for weeks, but no body was ever found. They'd found his wife, though, dead in that same cabin. It was ruled a murder-suicide, though no weapon was ever recovered. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and tried to convince myself none of it meant anything. But when I went to get in my car the next morning, the smell hit me again, that same wet, metallic scent. The passenger seat was damp. A faint trail of muddy prints led from the footwell to the door. I haven't driven that road since. But sometimes, on foggy nights, I dream I'm back there. Highway 90, stretching endlessly ahead, fog curling like breath across the headlights. And I see him again, walking barefoot along the shoulder, turning toward me with that same quiet desperation. And every time, he says the same thing. I just need to get back before she notices I'm gone. I've driven the same route between Lubbock and Amarillo for nearly 12 years. Long enough to know the feel of the road, the way it hums through your bones, the way the wind pulls against the cab, the kind of darkness that feels thick, like a living thing pressing against the glass. That night, it was the kind of black that eats your headlights. No moon, no taillights, just me, the road, and 40,000 pounds of boxed produce rattling in the back. It started raining somewhere past Plainview. Not heavy, just that whispery drizzle that blurs the windshield and makes the asphalt shine like oil. I kept both hands on the wheel, half dazed by the rhythm of the wipers, thinking about my ex-wife, about how quiet the truck felt lately. Then the check engine light blinked on. At first, I ignored it. Out there, there's nowhere to stop. Just endless fields, windmills, and the occasional sign half swallowed by the dark. But within minutes, the truck started coughing. A deep, metallic groan came from underneath the hood, and the whole rig began to shudder like it was holding its breath. I eased it onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched. The engine sputtered twice and went dead. When I stepped out, the wind cut through me, cold, damp, smelling like mud and rot. The rain had stopped, but the air was full of mist, curling around the edges of the trailer like smoke. No lights in either direction. Just that long, empty Texas highway stretching into nothing. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures. After a few minutes of staring at the engine, pretending I knew what I was doing, I gave up and climbed back into the cab. I figured I'd sleep a few hours and call for help in the morning. But then the knocking started. At first, I thought it was the rain again. Soft, irregular taps against the trailer. I turned down the CB radio, just static, and listened. The knocks came again. Steady this time. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was inside the trailer hitting the wall from the other side. I froze. I hadn't picked up any hitchhikers. The trailer was sealed at the depot in Lubbock, standard produce haul. Nobody could have gotten in. I waited, not breathing. Then I noticed something worse. Each knock came exactly when my heart did, like an echo from inside me. I'd feel a pulse in my chest, then thump from the trailer. My breath quickened, my heart raced, and the knocks sped up too. I tried to calm myself, to think. Maybe the cargo was shifting. Maybe something fell and was bouncing in rhythm. But the sound, it wasn't random, it was alive. I climbed down again, flashlight in hand, boots sinking into the wet gravel. The night smelled heavy, earthy and sour, like old fruit. I walked around to the back of the trailer, light cutting through fog. Everything looked normal. Padlock sealed, no dents, no movement. Still, the sound kept coming. Thump, thump, thump. It was faint now, like it was buried inside the load. I stood there, hand on the cold metal door, feeling the vibration. My heart was pounding, and I swear I could feel the knocks through the steel, chasing it beat for beat. Something about that broke me. I stumbled back, dropped the flashlight, and climbed into the cab again, locking both doors. For the rest of the night I sat in the dark, the sound coming and going. Sometimes it stopped for long stretches and I'd think it was over. Then it would start again, slow and steady, matching my pulse. When morning came, The mist hadn't lifted. Everything outside looked washed out and colorless, like the world had been drained. I tried the ignition again, nothing. But the strangest thing, the moment I realized the knocking had stopped, my heartbeat did too. Only for a second, but long enough to feel it. Long enough to make me wonder if the sound wasn't coming from the trailer at all. By late morning, a tow truck finally appeared. A rust-colored Ford with a cracked windshield and a faded Harlan's Diesel Service decal on the door. The driver, a gray-haired man in a flannel coat, didn't say much. Just circled the rig, spat into the dirt, and said he could tow me to a shop in Happy, about 20 miles east. While he hooked the rig, I walked around the trailer again. The padlock was still sealed, but there was a new mark on the door, a perfect circle, no bigger than a quarter, rubbed into the grime like a fingerprint. I brushed my thumb over it. The metal felt warm. I didn't mention it. We drove in silence. The tow line jerked now and then, making the cab rattle. Outside, the world looked like an old photograph. Gray sky, wet fields, black crows balanced on fence posts. When we finally rolled into Happy, the shop was little more than a sagging barn off the main road. A faded sign out front said Harlan's in hand-painted letters. The air smelled like diesel and rain-soaked hay. Inside, I waited while the old man poked around under the hood. The office was small, lined with water-stained wallpaper and curling photos of trucks long since scrapped. I noticed an old wall clock, its second hand ticking slow, almost dragging. Then I heard it again. Thump, thump, thump. Faint this time from outside, from the trailer. I walked out. The air felt heavier than before. The sound was steady, like someone trapped inside still knocking, still in time with me. "Harlan," I called. "You hear that?" He stepped out from the garage, wiping his hands. "Hear what?" I froze. The knocking had stopped the second he looked at me. "Nothing," I said. He stared a moment longer, then went back inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I unlatched the padlock and pulled the trailer doors open. Cold air rushed out, thick with the smell of rot and damp cardboard. Inside, the boxes were scattered. Some split open, fruit spilling across the floor. Apples, pears, bananas, all blackened, soft, like they'd been sitting for months instead of hours. And in the center, a dark, wet patch, the size of a man. I stepped closer, the wooden floorboards creaking under my boots. The spot wasn't just wet, it was oily, with something embedded in it, a small metal circle. I reached down, but stopped halfway. It was the same size as that mark on the door. My pulse quickened, thump. The sound came again, but not from the trailer this time, from inside me. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, the world shrinking to that slow, pulsing rhythm echoing in my skull. When I blinked, the dark patch seemed larger, closer, like it was spreading toward me. I stumbled out and slammed the doors shut, locking them. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Harlan found me sitting on the ground beside the truck, head between my knees. He didn't ask what happened, just told me the engine was shot and that I'd need a replacement rig to haul the trailer. I told him to keep it. That was 3 months ago. I still hear it sometimes, usually late at night when everything's quiet. That soft, steady thump from somewhere deep in my chest. My doctor says it's anxiety, that I'm imagining it. But I can tell when it's coming. The air thickens, like that fog from the highway, and I feel that hollow echo sinking with my pulse. I haven't driven since, and sometimes when I wake up sweating in the dark, I swear I can still smell the fruit, rotten, wet, and sweet. It lingers in my lungs, like the road never really let me go. I was somewhere between Bluefield and Welch, winding through the Appalachian backroads that slice through old coal towns and fog-heavy valleys, when I saw her. It was close to midnight, the kind of night where the fog rolls down like smoke from the mountains, thick enough that even my high beams felt useless. I was heading home from a job site in Virginia. Long week, bad weather, just wanted my own bed. Then, just past a mile marker half covered in moss, I saw her. A woman walking along the shoulder, barely visible in the mist. She had on a denim jacket and carried a small duffel, her hair damp and sticking to her face. She didn't turn around as I slowed down beside her, just kept walking with her head down. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe because out here, miles from the next town, you don't leave someone stranded. Maybe because she looked like she'd been walking for a long time. When she finally looked at me, her face caught the light, pale, tired, mid-30s maybe. I rolled the window down a bit and called out, "You need a ride somewhere?" She hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just up the road, toward Abilene." Her voice was calm, flat almost. I unlocked the door. She climbed in without another word. The car filled with the smell of damp clothes and something faintly like smoke, not cigarettes, more like old ashes. She sat stiffly, staring out the windshield. We rode in silence for a while. The only sounds were the wipers squeaking and the hum of tires on wet asphalt. After maybe 10 minutes, I asked, "Where you headed?" She glanced at me. "Home," she said softly. "Haven't been back in a long time. My boy's there." There was a faint smile when she said it, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded. "That's good. Family's important." She didn't answer, just looked out her window again. I tried again a few minutes later. "You from round here?" She nodded. "Down by Abilene, near the old county road. Used to have a little place there, white porch, garden out front." Her voice trailed off. Then, almost like she was talking to herself, she said, "Used to be nice before the fire." I glanced at her, confused. "Fire?" She didn't respond, just stared out the window, her reflection floating pale in the glass. We drove for another hour, winding through hollow valleys and old mining roads where the trees pressed in tight. The fog never lifted. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No other cars, no houses, just the rhythm of the road and the low hum of rain on the roof. Then, suddenly, she sat up straighter. Her hand pressed against the window. "That's it," she whispered. Ahead, through the fog, I could barely make out a structure, or what was left of one. A burned-out ruin sat a few yards off the road, collapsed roof, blackened beams jutting like ribs. The mailbox leaned crooked, half sunk into the mud. She turned to me. "That's my house right there." Before I could say anything, she opened the door. We were still moving, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. The interior light flickered on for a second, her face pale and calm as she stepped out. Then the door slammed back shut and she was gone. I hit the brakes so hard I nearly spun out. The fog swallowed everything. I jumped out, shouting, stumbling down the embankment toward the ruin. My flashlight cut through gray mist and wet ash. But there was nothing. No sign of her, no footprints. Just the faint smell of something burned years ago, and the sound of wind moving through broken boards. I didn't sleep that night. I ended up pulling into a roadside diner a few miles north of Abilene, and sat there until morning. The waitress must have noticed something in my face, because she asked if I was all right. I told her what happened, how the woman jumped out before I could stop her, how I searched but never found a trace. The waitress just stared for a long time, then said, "You mean out past the ridge, near the old Johnson property?" I shrugged. Didn't see a sign, just a burned-down house. She nodded slowly, her expression changing. That place burned in '09. Woman and her boy lived there. He made it out. She didn't. Then, almost to herself, she added, "Folks say he still lives near there, keeps to himself." Her words hit me like a stone to the chest. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew what I saw. The smell of smoke, the way she spoke about her son like she still expected to see him. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd picked up someone unstable, someone who panicked, or... No, I'd watched her step out calmly, like she knew exactly where she was going. The next day, I went back. I shouldn't have, but the image of that burned house kept looping in my head. The fog was thinner that morning, the air cold and metallic. When I found the place again, daylight made it worse. The ground was still scarred black in places, and what remained of the porch had collapsed inward. I parked on the shoulder and climbed the ditch. There was a child's tricycle half buried in the weeds, rusted, one wheel missing. In the debris, a few warped boards still held faint traces of white paint. The house must have been beautiful once. Near the back, under a collapsed section of wall, something caught my eye, a bit of metal sticking out from the dirt. I crouched down and pulled it loose. It was a locket. Inside was a photo, water-damaged, but you could still make out a woman and a little boy standing on that same porch, both smiling. I felt my stomach twist. It was her. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that photo. The silence around me was suffocating. No birds, no insects, just the faint creak of wood settling in the wind. Then I heard it, faint, from somewhere up the hill, the sound of a screen door opening. I turned. There was another house up the slope, smaller but still, standing. Smoke rose weakly from its chimney. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I climbed toward it, boots slipping in the mud. The house looked old, but lived in. Patched windows, a sagging roof. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. There was a name scratched into the wood near the door, Johnson. I knocked once. A man's voice answered quietly, "Yeah?" He opened the door just enough for me to see him. Early 20s, maybe, with soot-dark hair and hollow eyes. His face looked worn, older than it should. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. I think I picked up someone last night near here. A woman said she was coming home to see her son." He stared at me for a long time. Then, without a word, he closed the door. Through the window, I saw him sit down at a table. There was a picture frame beside him, the same photo that was in the locket. He didn't look back. I left the locket on the porch and walked away. The fog started to roll down the hill again, swallowing the house until it looked like part of the mountain itself. I never told anyone else about that night. Sometimes, when I drive through those roads again for work, I catch glimpses of smoke rising in the distance, or a figure walking along the shoulder in the mist. I tell myself it's nothing. Just my mind playing tricks, maybe. But every time I pass the burned house, I can still smell that faint trace of ash. And I can still hear her voice, soft and certain, saying, "That's my house right there." I was hauling 14 head of cattle down Route 277, cutting through the backcountry near Eagle Pass. The sun was gone and the fog had rolled in early, turning the road into a slow, silver ribbon that kept vanishing under the truck's headlights. The cattle were restless in the trailer, hooves thudding against the metal every few seconds. It was late, and I hadn't eaten since morning, so when I saw a single flickering neon sign that read, "Gas, food, cold beer," I pulled in. The place looked half dead. A squat concrete building with one pump, the numbers on it faded to gray. The windows were fogged over from the inside, and I could barely make out someone behind the counter. When I stepped inside, the air smelled like damp newspapers and gasoline. The ceiling fan was barely spinning, creaking every time it rotated. The clerk didn't say a word at first. He was an older man, thin, hollow-eyed, wearing a trucker cap that had once been red but was now the color of dust. He just rang up my drink and stared at the counter. When I asked about the road ahead, how far until the next town, he didn't look up. His voice was low, barely a whisper. "Don't stop on that bridge after dark." I gave him a small laugh, thinking maybe it was some local ghost story. "What bridge?" I asked. He just shook his head. "You'll know it." That was all he said. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the pump light. The sound of the highway was gone. It felt like the world had shrunk down to the small cone of light around my truck. I climbed in, turned the key, and sat there for a moment with his words still echoing. I told myself he was just one of those back-road weirdos trying to mess with travelers. But as I pulled out, I noticed something strange. On the ground near the side of the station, faint in the dirt, were several bare footprints, small and pale, leading toward the tree line behind the building. They didn't look fresh, but the sight of them in that cold mist made something tighten in my chest. I drove off before I could think about it too long. The highway was empty for miles. The fog turned everything flat and gray. Even the mountains looked like shadows pressed against the clouds. My headlights caught the occasional road sign, each one more rusted and bent than the last. Then I saw it. A single-lane bridge stretching over what looked like a dry creek bed. The structure was old, wood planks with steel beams, and there wasn't a light for miles around. The fog sat heavy across it like a blanket. I slowed, the sound of the tires changing pitch as they rolled onto the boards. The trailer creaked behind me, and I could hear the cattle shifting nervously. Halfway across, something hit the side of the truck. Soft but distinct, like a hand slap. I froze, gripping the wheel. The sound came again, then again. A rhythm of dull, fleshy thuds along the side of the cab. I turned my head toward the passenger window but saw only white fog and my own reflection. I pressed the gas, tires spinning for a second before catching traction. The noise stopped the moment I reached the other side. My pulse was hammering, but I told myself it had to be tree branches or debris kicked up from the wind. I didn't stop. I just kept driving until I reached an old rest area about 15 miles down the road. It was empty except for a single soda machine humming in the dark. I parked under the one flickering streetlight and got out to check the cattle. That's when I saw it. The passenger side window, the whole pane, was covered in handprints. Dozens of them. Some small, some large, all pressed hard enough to smear the condensation. The fingers were uneven, some bent, some crooked, overlapping each other in all directions, and every one of them faced outward, as if someone, or something, inside the cab had pressed their hands against the glass, trying to get out. I stood there for a long time, listening to the rain starting to fall and the faint lowing of the cattle behind me. When I finally got back in, I didn't touch that window. I just wiped the fog off the windshield and kept driving through the mist until dawn. The next morning, I pulled into the ranch near Del Rio, unloaded the cattle, and tried to shake off what I'd seen. The ranch hand who signed for the delivery looked at me funny when I asked if there was another route north that didn't cross a bridge near Eagle Pass. He said there wasn't. Just Route 277 and that old bridge over the Seco Creek. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was moisture, dust, or oil from my own hands. But when I wiped the glass later, the prints didn't smear right. They'd left faint outlines, as if the oils had burned into the surface. I had to scrub hard to get them off. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twisted fingers pressing against the glass. I started replaying the night over and over. What time I'd left, what the clerk said, whether I'd really heard the slapping sounds or if I'd just imagined them. 3 nights later, I drove back that same route. I wasn't supposed to. I didn't have a haul. I just needed to see that bridge again. Needed to prove to myself it was just a bad trick of the fog. The gas station was gone when I got there. The sign was still hanging, but the windows were boarded up. No lights, no car, no sound. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty building, then got back in and kept driving. When I reached the bridge, I slowed down. The boards creaked just like before. The fog was thinner this time, but the silence was worse. Even the crickets had stopped. Halfway across, I stopped the truck. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to show myself nothing would happen. I sat there, engine idling, and listened. Then I heard it again, soft tapping on the passenger glass. One tap, then another. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. I leaned closer to the window. The condensation from my breath clouded the glass. For a second, I thought I saw the faintest shapes, small hands pressing from the outside. I blinked, and they were gone. I floored it. The trailer jolted, the cattle bawled, and I didn't stop until I hit pavement miles past the bridge. My chest hurt from how hard I was breathing. When I finally pulled over, I realized I'd left deep fingernail marks in the steering wheel. That was 2 years ago. I don't take Route 277 anymore. I reroute all my deliveries, even if it costs me time and fuel. Sometimes, though, on foggy nights, I still find handprints on my windows. Not many, just 1 or 2. Always on the inside. I don't tell anyone about it anymore, not the company, not the other drivers, because when I scrub them off, they come back by morning. And every single one still faces outward. It was late October when I started my drive through the Appalachian backroads between Huntsville and Hollow Bend. I was heading home after a work trip in Knoxville, trying to shave an hour off the route by cutting through the old logging roads that snaked through the mountains. Locals told me not to take them after dark, said they were narrow, slick, and easy to get lost on when the fog rolled in. But I'd driven worse. By the time I hit the foothills, the sun was gone. The mist clung low, moving like pale smoke through the trees. My headlights cut through it in long, hazy beams, lighting up nothing but wet bark and empty asphalt. It must have been close to 11 when it happened. I was rounding a curve near an old wooden bridge when I saw movement, something stepping out from the tree line. I didn't have time to brake. My tires squealed, my stomach flipped, and I heard a dull, heavy thud against the bumper. The car jolted. I froze, gripping the steering wheel. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. My mind caught up a moment later. Deer. I hit a deer. I got out, my boots sinking into the mud at the roadside. The air smelled like wet leaves and rust. The bridge creaked behind me as wind moved through the boards. But there was nothing there. I walked the shoulder with my flashlight, checking the ditch, the trees. Even under the bridge, no blood, no fur. Not even a dent in my car. Just fog and silence thick enough to make me feel like I was underwater. I remember thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But I knew what I'd felt. The car hit something. After a few minutes, I climbed back inside, hands still shaking, and drove on. The road twisted endlessly through the forest. No lights, no houses. Just the hum of the engine and that feeling in my gut, like something was behind me on the road, walking in the fog. By the time I saw the sign for a rest stop, Old Hollow Overlook, 1 mile. I was desperate for a break. The place was almost empty. Just one other car, an old blue pickup with West Virginia plates. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly over the cracked concrete and vending machines. Everything smelled faintly like mildew and rain. I went inside the bathroom, splashed water on my face, tried to shake it off. When I came out, a man was standing by the vending machine, late 50s maybe, wiry, wearing a camo jacket that looked damp. His truck was the one parked outside. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, calm as anything, "You saw her too, didn't you?" I froze halfway to my car. "Who?" I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't the friendly kind, the one that always gets up after you drive off. He said it like it was a fact, like he'd seen it happen 100 times. Then he turned back to his coffee cup, acting like the conversation was over. I didn't reply. I just got in my car and locked the doors. As I pulled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there by the vending machines, coffee in hand, watching my taillights fade into the fog. That drive back through the mountains felt endless. Every shadow on the road looked like something rising from the ground. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw movement just past the headlights, something trying to keep pace with me. When I finally reached Hollow Bend, the clock on my dash said 2:14 a.m. I checked the front of the car again in the gas station light. Still no mark, no scratch. But I swear when I leaned down, I smelled something faint and rotten, like mud and old meat. I didn't sleep that night. For days after that night, I couldn't get the man's words out of my head. The one that always gets up after you drive off. At first, I told myself it was just some local superstition, an old mountain ghost story meant to scare outsiders. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt personal, like he'd been waiting for someone who'd seen what I saw. 3 nights later, I drove back. I told myself it was to prove nothing had happened. That there was no her, no deer, no ghost, just a foggy night and a jumpy imagination. The weather had turned colder. Mist hugged the asphalt, and the forest seemed even darker. The same turns, the same bridge. My stomach tightened as I slowed near the spot. I didn't expect to find anything, but I saw the scuffed dirt on the shoulder where I'd stopped before, and in the ditch, something pale. I parked, left the engine running. The light caught a torn piece of fabric tangled in a bush, thin, faded blue, like the edge of a dress. My mouth went dry. I backed away fast, telling myself it was coincidence. Someone's trash, nothing more. But when I turned back toward the road, I saw footprints, bare, small, leading from the ditch toward the bridge. They disappeared into the mud halfway across. That's when I noticed something else. On the far side of the bridge, by the guardrail, a car was parked, an old blue pickup. Same plates, same truck. The man from the rest stop was sitting in the driver's seat, his head tilted toward the window like he was asleep. I hesitated, heart hammering, then knocked on the glass. He didn't move. I opened the door. It wasn't locked. The smell hit me first. Rot, damp clothes, something sour underneath. His eyes were open, cloudy. His skin was pale, cold. He'd been dead a while. I stumbled back, tripping over the curb. My flashlight beam shook across the ground. And that's when I saw the muddy handprints. Dozens of them smeared along the truck door, trailing off toward the woods. Small, like a woman's. I ran. I don't remember the drive home. Just fog, curves, and my pulse in my throat. But halfway down the mountain, I glanced in the mirror and saw headlights behind me. For a second, I thought it was another car, but they moved too smoothly, too close, until they weren't headlights at all. Just 2 pale shapes reflecting in the dark. When I reached the edge of town, they were gone. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office, told them about the truck, the body, the bridge. They went out there that afternoon, called me back that evening. They said there was nothing there, no truck, no footprints, just an old bridge and the sound of water underneath. Now, every time I drive through those mountains, and I still have to for work, I slow near that same curve. I tell myself not to look, but every single time I do. And sometimes, just before the fog swallows the road, I see something pale by the shoulder, like someone trying to stand up. I drove nights because the quiet suited me. After my divorce, the long, empty stretches between Dallas and El Paso felt like the only place where my thoughts couldn't catch up. The hum of the tires, the soft rattle of the load, it all blurred into a rhythm that helped me forget how empty my apartment was when I got back. That stretch of highway past Abilene, out toward the foothills of the Appalachians, always felt different after midnight. The road dipped into these low, fog-soaked valleys where cell service died, and the trees leaned so close over the asphalt it felt like you were being swallowed. That's where the first time happened, right around mile marker 412. I remember glancing at the clock. It was just after 2 a.m. The CB was on, channel 19, and I was half listening to static when I heard it. A voice, faint but sharp through the fuzz. Tom. It wasn't background noise. It was my name. I froze with my hand on the wheel, leaning closer to the radio, thinking maybe someone I knew was nearby. But the channel stayed dead quiet for a full minute, like even the static was holding its breath. I told myself it was interference, maybe a cross signal from another rig. I'd been on the road too long. I turned the radio down and kept driving. Over the next few runs, it happened again. Always at 412. Always just my name. Soft, sometimes drawn out like someone testing if I'd respond. Once, I even answered. Yeah? Nothing, just static. After that, I stopped using that stretch for a while. Took alternate routes through Fort Stockton or up toward Amarillo, even though they added hours. But the dispatcher didn't like that, and fuel costs were killing my paycheck. So, against my better judgment, I went back. It was raining that night, the kind of steady drizzle that makes everything look slick and hollow. My windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a rubbery groan. The fog was thick enough that the high beams made it worse, just glowing white walls of mist that seemed to breathe. When I hit marker 412, the voice came back, clearer this time. Tom. I turned the volume all the way down. My chest tightened. I could still hear it, though, faint, even with the dial turned off. It was coming from somewhere else. The sleeper cab behind me creaked like someone had shifted their weight on the mattress. I pulled over on instinct. The truck idled beside the narrow shoulder, half its body swallowed by fog. The trees around me were wet, their limbs dripping with water that sounded like quiet tapping against the hood. I climbed down and circled the truck with a flashlight. No footprints, no movement. Just the sound of rain hitting mud. When I opened the passenger door, something smelled wrong. Like old copper and mildew, the inside of a long-abandoned house. I ran the light across the seat. Everything was where I left it, but there was a faint handprint in the fogged glass of the side window. Small, like a child's, half wiped away. That was the first time I thought about quitting. But I didn't. Because the strange thing about loneliness is that sometimes even fear feels like company. When I got back to Dallas that morning, I parked the truck, went inside the terminal, and sat staring at my hands for almost an hour. The skin around my nails was white from gripping the wheel too tight. I told my supervisor I was done with the 412 run. He didn't argue, he just nodded like he already knew. Still, some nights, when the apartment was too quiet and I couldn't sleep, I'd turn on my old CB just to listen to the static. Sometimes I swore I could still hear that voice faintly beneath the hiss. My name, drawn out slow. Waiting. I stayed off that highway for nearly a year. Then, one Friday, dispatch called. Short notice, double pay, simple haul. Route west to El Paso. I told them no. They told me the load had to move tonight. I stared at the map on the wall, my eyes tracing the thick black line that cut through the valleys like a scar. Mile marker 412. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just didn't want to keep being afraid of an empty road. By midnight, the mountains were black silhouettes against the fog. The truck's headlights skimmed across wet asphalt, making the mist flash white. The air smelled like pine rot and rain. My radio stayed off. The silence felt heavier than the hum of the engine. At 2:11 a.m., the odometer told me I was close. The fog thickened. My headlights caught the green shimmer of the mile marker sign, 412, bent slightly, paint peeling at the edges. As I passed it, I caught something else in the beams. Another road, almost invisible, cutting off to the right. It wasn't marked, just a muddy trail disappearing into trees. And then the radio turned itself on. The dial twisted halfway before I even touched it. Static filled the cab, and under it, that voice. "Tom, you missed the turn again." The words froze me. The voice wasn't distant this time. It was behind me. I didn't turn around. My throat went dry. I shifted into neutral, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the windshield. I could see faint shapes in the fog, maybe trees, maybe not. The voice came again, closer, almost a whisper right against my ear. "You always miss it." I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. Mud sprayed from the tires as I tore down the highway, heart pounding. The radio howled with static, then cut off completely. The only sound was the engine and the rain hammering the windshield. I didn't stop until dawn. Parked at a gas station outside Van Horn, I sat there, drenched in sweat, staring at the empty passenger seat. The smell of copper was back, stronger this time. When I looked down, the seatbelt was buckled. I hadn't done that. Later, when I finally told a local mechanic about it, he went quiet. Said there used to be a side road near 412 that led to a small town called Lowridge, but it was washed out years ago after a mudslide. No map lists it now. No one lives there. I asked him how far it was. He just said, "You can't get there anymore." I stopped driving altogether after that night, sold the rig, moved east, closer to the mountains where it's quieter. But sometimes when the fog rolls through the valley and the forest hums low with cicadas, I'll hear a faint crackle, like radio static. It's always the same 3 words, low, familiar, patient. You missed it. The thing is, I've started to dream about that turn. The dirt road vanishing into fog. In the dream, I always take it. There's a cabin at the end, old and leaning, with the door slightly open. Someone waits inside, just out of sight. And every time I wake, the smell of rain and metal clings to my clothes. I keep a CB radio by my bed now, not plugged in, just sitting there, silent. But last week, when I couldn't sleep, I swear, I heard it hiss to life. A single crackle through the speaker. And my name. Soft. Careful. Like it didn't want to wake me. I was supposed to be driving straight through to Knoxville, but sometime past midnight I caught myself drifting into the opposite lane. The rain hadn't let up for hours, just that steady, bone-deep drizzle that turns fog into something alive. My wipers made no difference. Every few minutes I blinked and realized I'd gone a mile without remembering it. When the road curved around a stretch of dense pine, I saw the lights. an old roadside motel sign flickering weakly through the mist. The letters were half gone, but I could still make out Hollow Creek Motor Lodge, the kind of place that looked like it used to serve truckers and families back in the 70s, before the new highway rerouted all the traffic somewhere else. I pulled in. Gravel cracked under my tires. Only one room had a light on, the office. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and stale smoke. A bell sat on the counter, though it looked like no one had touched it in years. After a few seconds, I heard shuffling from the back. A man stepped out. Thin, gray, with watery eyes that never quite met mine. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me like I'd woken him up from something long and heavy. "Room?" he asked finally. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Yeah, just for the night," I said. "I fell asleep at the wheel." He stared for a beat too long before reaching under the counter. His hand came back with an old brass key, the tag worn smooth. "Number 7, he said. "End of the row. Don't open the curtains." I thought I misheard. "Sorry, what?" "Keep the curtains shut all night." He said it slowly, like he was repeating instructions he didn't want to. I just nodded. I was too tired to argue. Room 7 was at the far end of a crooked line of doors, each with peeling blue paint and rusted knobs. The rain was heavier now. I had to push the door twice before it opened. The inside smelled like wet carpet and something sweet rotting beneath it, like old fruit. The bed was still made, but the sheets felt damp. There was a Bible on the nightstand, swollen from moisture, and an old rotary phone that didn't work. I turned on the lamp. The light buzzed and filled the room with a sickly yellow glow. The window was covered with heavy brown curtains. Thick dust coated the edges. I thought about what the clerk said, but exhaustion won out over curiosity. I just sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, and stared at the cracks in the ceiling. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I woke up. The room was pitch black. I didn't remember turning off the lamp, but I must have. What woke me wasn't a dream, it was a sound. Tap, then again, tap, tap. It came from the window, slow, irregular, like fingernails on glass. I froze. I didn't move or breathe. Tap. Then nothing, for a full minute. Just the rain on the roof, steady and distant. I told myself it was probably a branch or the wind, but I knew that sound. I'd heard it before. Someone, testing glass, light enough not to break it. I wanted to look. Every part of me wanted to look. But I remembered the clerk's voice. "Don't open the curtains." So I didn't. I lay there, eyes open, until dawn started bleeding through the edges of the fabric. The tapping stopped sometime before that, though I never heard footsteps or car or anything leaving. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the mountains were holding their breath. When I finally stepped outside that morning, everything was still. The rain had stopped, but fog hung low over the tree line. The clerk's office light was off. The door was locked. That's when I noticed the lot. Empty, not a single car. Even my tire tracks from the night before were gone, like the gravel had been smoothed over. I turned back toward the building, uneasy. The motel looked older now somehow, boards sagging, vines creeping up the walls, like it hadn't been touched in years. Still, I went to the office window and peered in. The room was empty. Dust covered everything. The counter where the bell had been was bare, and the calendar on the wall read, June 2014. I stood there for a long time, staring through the glass. The silence of the mountains was different that morning, denser. Even the birds weren't calling. I thought maybe I'd pulled into some kind of old tourist spot that still kept a few rooms open, but something about that calendar clawed at me. I walked the length of the motel. Most of the doors were swollen shut or hanging off their hinges. Room 3 had ivy crawling in through a broken window. Room 5 smelled like gasoline and wet rust. When I reached Room 7 again, the door was still unlocked. Inside, the air had gone sour overnight. The damp was stronger, heavier, like it had seeped out from the walls. The curtains were still closed. The memory of that tapping crawled up my spine. On the nightstand, something caught my eye, faint smudges on the surface, darker than the wood. I leaned closer. They looked like fingerprints. A lot of them. Small ones, overlapping, like someone had been standing there with both hands pressed against it. I looked down. Mud tracked from the window to the center of the floor. Bare footprints, small, too small to be mine. My first thought was a kid. Maybe someone had broken in. But the prints led straight to the window and stopped there. No exit. The urge to open those curtains, it felt almost physical, like something behind them was aware of me standing there. I grabbed my bag and left. I didn't even look back at the office. I just got in my car and drove until the gas light came on. It wasn't until I reached a gas station about 20 miles out that I realized my phone had no signal, and the battery was nearly dead. Inside, I told the cashier about the motel, mostly to convince myself it had happened. He looked at me like I was playing some kind of joke. "Hollow Creek," he said. "That place burned down years ago. Lightning hit it, caught. The whole roof. Nobody's stayed there since." I told him that wasn't possible. I'd just been there. The rooms were standing. The office was open. There was a man, thin, gray, quiet. He shook his head. "Ain't nobody out there. County fenced it off." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those fingerprints, hearing the soft rhythm of that tapping. 2 weeks later, I went back. I told myself I just needed proof, that the building was real, that maybe I'd mistaken one old motel for another. The road was rougher this time. The trees seemed to have swallowed half of it. When I finally found the spot, the sign was still there, leaning sideways. But where the motel had stood, there was nothing. Just a foundation, half covered in vines, the air thick with the smell of burned timber and wet moss. I walked around what used to be the office, found the frame of the counter, rusted nails where the bell might have been. In the dirt near the back wall, I saw something glinting. An old brass key tag, number 7. I don't know how long I stood there holding it. Long enough for the fog to start closing in, swallowing the trees and the ridgelines until it felt like I was the only thing left in that valley. When the wind shifted, I heard it again. Soft, distant, tap, tap, tap. I left it there, dropped the key, walked to my car, and drove without looking in the mirrors. I've never told anyone this out loud, not really. Because every time I try, I start to doubt the details. Maybe I dreamed the man. Maybe the exhaustion twisted everything. But sometimes, late at night, when rain hits my window just right, I catch myself listening for that rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. And I still can't bring myself to open the curtains. I was hauling reclaimed lumber out of a mill site south of Big Bend, heading through the high passes of the Appalachians on Route 39. It was close to midnight, the kind of mountain dark where the fog turns the world into wet shadows. My rig's headlights cut through barely 20 feet of road before getting swallowed by mist. Everything outside the glass felt like it didn't exist anymore. The roads out there twist like ribs. Old pine needles cover the shoulders, and every turn feels like you're climbing into the throat of something. I'd been on the route plenty of times before, but that night felt different. Quiet, too quiet, even for that part of Virginia. The first time I noticed the headlights behind me was near a gas station that had been shut down for years. Just two pale beams through the fog, hovering back about 200 yards. Nothing strange at first. Lots of locals take those back roads to avoid the tollway. But after the third hour, I realized they hadn't left. Every curve I made, every hill I crested, those lights were there, steady, low to the ground. I'd speed up, they'd match it. I'd slow for a turn, they'd slow too. Around 1 a.m., the road narrowed into a single lane, stretch hugging the mountainside. No shoulder, just a drop. I caught myself staring into my side mirror more than at the road. My hands were slick on the wheel. I told myself it was nothing, just some local hauling late, same as me. But when I pulled into a turnout to let them pass, they didn't. I sat there, idling. My hazard lights blinked across the fog, making it look alive. The headlights behind me stopped about 100 yards back, then went still. For a while, neither of us moved. I waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. The mist began crawling closer, like a slow tide. Then, without warning, the lights blinked twice. 2 quick flashes. Then darkness. No movement after that. No sound except the ticking of my engine. I watched the mirror until my eyes ached, but the fog thickened and hid everything. Finally, I put the truck in gear and drove off, telling myself they must have turned around or killed their engine. Still, every few seconds I'd glance back, expecting those beams to appear again. They never did. When I finally reached the yard near Lexington, dawn was creeping over the ridge. I parked by the way station, climbed down, and just stood there. My legs were trembling from driving too long. The fog clung to my jacket, cold and earthy. It smelled like wet moss and exhaust. I went inside to log my delivery. The clerk, a guy named Ron, looked me over and said, "You look like hell. Long night." I laughed it off, told him some car had been tailing me for hours. He said, "Out there? You're lucky it didn't run you off the road. Locals say folks go missing near Big Bend all the time." He was half joking, but I didn't laugh. Later, when I was alone in my cab, I pulled the memory card from my dash cam. I'd been recording the trip for insurance reasons. My fingers were still shaky as I slid it into my laptop. I wanted to see those headlights just to prove I hadn't imagined it. The video started fine. Empty road, fog, my dashboard lights flickering off the windshield. Then, around midnight, the glow appeared behind me, exactly where I'd seen it. Following, steady, I scrubbed ahead to the part where I'd pulled over. I leaned close to the screen, and that's when I froze. On the footage, the road behind me was empty. Nothing there, but there was a pair of headlights, not behind me but in front, parked maybe 30 feet ahead, buried in fog, perfectly still, facing me, and they never moved the entire time. I didn't sleep that morning. I sat in the cab with the laptop replaying the clip over and over, trying to make sense of it. The timestamps were right. The road markers matched. My memory and the footage didn't agree, but they were both too vivid to dismiss. In my mind, I saw the lights trailing behind me for hours, steady as a heartbeat. But the camera showed something impossible. Headlights in front of me, motionless, for miles. At first, I thought maybe the lens had mirrored the image, but I knew that dash cam used it every trip. No glitches before. Still, I needed to prove to myself the footage was wrong. So that afternoon I drove back. The fog had lifted, leaving behind a damp smell of pine and diesel. The mountains looked hollowed out, like the world had been carved from wet stone. I passed the same landmarks, the rusted gas station, the crumbling mile markers, the turnout where I'd stopped. When I reached it, I pulled over again. The tire marks were still there, mine from the night before. The dirt was soft and dark, but on the other side of the road near the guardrail, I saw something that made my stomach knot. There were other tire tracks, narrow, older. They led off the pavement right to the edge of the drop. The soil was caved in where the guardrail had been replaced. Someone had gone over. The air was so quiet I could hear my pulse in my ears. I walked to the edge, careful not to slip, and looked down. Nothing but gray rock and tangled brush. But I saw a shape, deep in the hollow, half hidden in vines. Metal, rusted. A car. I climbed down halfway before stopping. The slope smelled of rot and rain-soaked leaves. I called out, though I didn't know why. My voice disappeared into the valley. When I got close enough to see through the shattered windshield, I saw that the car had been there a long time. Paint stripped, seats eaten by mildew. But on the cracked dashboard was something that stopped me cold, a small dash cam identical to mine. It was mounted the same way, facing forward. I don't remember climbing back up. I just remember driving away, fast, my hands shaking so badly I nearly missed a turn. Back in Lexington, I asked Ron how long that section of road had been open. He said the old route had been reworked after a landslide about 5 years ago. A couple cars went down there before they fixed it, he told me. Never pulled them all out. That night, I watched the footage again, this time with the sound on. If you turned the volume all the way up, you could hear something faint beneath the engine hum. Not wind, not the radio, a voice. It was low, muffled, almost a whisper. Hard to catch at first, but on the second replay I caught it clearly, right after the moment the headlights blinked out. It said, "Don't stop." That's all. 2 words. I deleted the file after that, formatted the memory card, but I can still see it when I close my eyes, the reflection of those lights cutting through fog, the sense that something was always there, watching. And sometimes when I haul through the Appalachians on another late run, I'll catch a flicker in my rear view, just 2 dim orbs steady in the mist. When that happens, I don't pull over anymore. I keep driving. Because whether it's memory, guilt, or just the mountain fog playing tricks, I know this much. Whatever was watching me that night never really left the road. I had been driving through the Appalachian foothills for hours, the rain sliding in cold sheets across the windshield, making the trees look like they were swaying in some kind of slow, mournful dance. I'd left the main highway near Oak Ridge, hoping to cut across some back roads, the kind that snake through valleys so deep they swallow the sun before noon. My old sedan skidded in the mud as I passed a stretch of road lined with rotting fences and moss-covered stones. I should have turned back, but curiosity kept me pressing forward. The fog was thick enough that even the nearest trees were blurred gray shapes. Somewhere ahead, I spotted a car pulled onto the shoulder. At first, I thought it was abandoned. Its body was rusted and pitted, paint peeling like sunburned skin, but as I got closer, I saw them. A man, a woman, and 2 children, standing beside the car, their clothes, I don't know how else to describe it, out of place. The man wore a tweed jacket that looked like it had been stitched decades ago, and the woman's dress had patterns I remembered from old photographs in my grandmother's attic. The kids' shoes were scuffed leather, far too formal for a rainy road. I slowed, my tires crunching the wet gravel, and rolled down my window. "You need some help?" I asked, my voice sounding absurdly loud in the misty silence. The man smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've been waiting for someone to stop," he said. "Thank you for helping." There was nothing threatening in his tone. In fact, it was almost gentle. But the words lodged in my chest like a splinter. Waiting for someone? It felt wrong. I stepped out, my boots squishing in the mud, and opened the passenger side of their car. Inside, the seats were cracked, the upholstery brittle. The scent was odd, dust and mildew, but beneath that, something almost metallic, like rusted blood. I coughed and shut the door quickly, feeling the first prickles of unease. They thanked me again as I climbed back into my car, trying to shake the feeling that I shouldn't have stopped. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the fog seemed to curl around the road like a living thing. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The car was gone. I blinked, then I blinked again. The road behind me was empty, slick with rain. No family, no car, nothing. A shiver ran down my spine as I pressed the accelerator. Then I saw it. Tire tracks beside mine in the mud. Fresh, running parallel. I had passed nobody. No other cars on this stretch in miles. The tracks were wide, deep, deliberate, and they weren't fading into the distance. They mirrored my own path exactly, as if someone or something had been following me. I told myself it was my imagination, that maybe I'd imagined the family, the smell, the metallic tang. I kept driving, but the unease didn't fade. Every time I glanced in the rear view, the fog seemed thicker, the trees closer, the silence heavier. By the time I reached the small town of Pine Hollow, the sky was dark, the streets empty. I tried to convince myself that Oak Ridge had played tricks on me, that the rain, the fog, my tired mind had conjured a story that didn't exist. But that tire track, it refused to let me forget. I parked at the only open diner, sat with a coffee that went cold in my hands, and stared out the window at the mist rolling over the hills. Somewhere in that fog, I had seen something I couldn't explain, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next morning, I woke to silence that felt heavier than the night. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low, a gray curtain pressed against the mountains. I decided to retrace my path back toward where I'd seen the family. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe guilt. Maybe I just needed to see if it had really happened. The road was slick, lined with skeletal trees. The forest smelled damp and sour, like old roots and fallen leaves decomposing in silence. As I drove, the sense of being watched pressed against me. Every rustle of branches, every distant bird call made my heart jump. I reached the spot where I'd stopped. Nothing. No car, no footprints in the mud, no evidence anyone had been there. Just the road, slick and shiny with rainwater, disappearing into the mist. But then I noticed the side of the road, something half buried in the mud. A boot. Old, cracked leather, the kind the man had worn. I leaned out of the car and pulled it free. Mud fell in clumps. There was no body, no other boot, nothing else. Just the boot, sunken into the wet earth as if it had been waiting for me to find it. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. I got back in the car, trembling, and tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Old boot, maybe lost decades ago. My mind tried to rationalize, but the rationalizations were fragile. The tire tracks. I remembered them. Parallel to mine, mirroring my path. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. There, faint but unmistakable, were more tracks behind me, though I hadn't stopped or seen anyone. They ended abruptly where the road curved into the fog. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I drove straight through Oak Ridge, through valleys that seemed to swallow the sky, through silent hollows where even the wind refused to stir. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the family's faces, their still, waiting eyes, the man's crooked smile. When I finally reached my apartment, I thought I could leave it behind. But at night I dream of the road, the fog, the car. And sometimes I wake to tire tracks in the dirt outside my own front door, tracks that shouldn't exist. I tried to tell myself it was memory playing tricks, that I had imagined the entire encounter on that lonely Appalachian road. But the unease never leaves. That waiting, that calm gratitude, is etched into my mind. And sometimes, when I drive at night through rain and fog, I swear I see them again, on the shoulder, just beyond the tree line, waiting for someone to stop. And I don't know if they ever will. I never thought a midnight run through the mountains could feel so isolating. My buddy, Tom, and I had been hauling supplies between towns for a small, backcountry logging outfit, and tonight was just another stretch of winding roads under a new moon. We were driving separate rigs along the old misty stretches near Fort Stockton, though in the Appalachians it might as well have been some forgotten hollow. The forest closed in on both sides of the road, branches scraping the sides of the trucks like fingernails. Tom had the CB on, keeping a steady chatter between us. I remember him joking earlier, complaining about how quiet the roads had been, like the mountains themselves had gone mute. I laughed at that, thinking it was just Tom being dramatic. I should have listened closer, but I had the heater cranked and a bag of stale jerky for company, and the monotony had me half asleep. We were somewhere past Old Bear Hollow when his voice came through the static, sharper than usual. "Hey, man, there's someone in my passenger seat." I snorted, waving at the dark woods beyond my windshield, thinking it was his usual brand of humor. "Very funny, Tom. Pull over and let me see this ghost, huh?" "Dude, I'm serious," he said, voice tightening. There was a pause. "They're just sitting there, quiet, watching me." I laughed harder this time, more out of nerves than humor. The fog was thick along the switchbacks, the yellow beams of the headlights glancing off slick, mossy trees. "Tom, come on, there's nobody there. You've been driving too long." Another pause, then a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, okay, just thought I should tell someone." That was the last time I heard him speak. A minute later, the CB crackled and hissed, and nothing, just static. I tried calling him over the radio, banging the microphone, but nothing came through. The mountains swallowed every word. My stomach sank. A weight I couldn't shake, but I told myself he'd pulled off somewhere. Maybe he fell asleep in the cab, maybe he stopped at a roadside pull-off. I kept driving, eyes scanning the misty roadside, headlights cutting through fog like a knife. It took nearly an hour before I saw it. His truck, parked at a curve just past a cluster of rotting pines. It was idling quietly, engine ticking, headlights casting pale yellow light onto the mud-soaked shoulder. Nothing about the truck had changed, the CB still flickering, the truck perfectly aligned with the roadside, doors locked. My heart thumped in my chest as I slowed. I circled it once, looking for him, calling his name. Nothing. The fog seemed to thicken around the vehicle, dulling the trees into shadowy shapes. I finally climbed out, the mud sucking at my boots. The smell of damp pine and rusting metal filled my nose, mixing with the faint scent of something I couldn't identify, like old wood left to rot under rain. I leaned against the cab, peering through the driver's side window. The seatbelt was fastened across the passenger seat, only there wasn't anyone there. My hand went to the handle, but the doors were locked. I stared for a long moment, the idle hum of the engine and my own breathing the only sounds. The woods behind me seemed to hold their breath. My mind raced through explanations, none of which felt plausible. Then, from the CB, a whisper of static and a voice, mine, cut through. "Tom, you there?" Nothing. Only the engine and the fog. My reflection in the windshield stared back at me, wide-eyed, sweating. I shook my head, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe some cruel joke, maybe something else. I slid into my truck, grabbed the CB and called in our location. But the airwaves remained empty, just the intermittent crackle of static. Something about the passenger seat made my chest tighten. That quiet, impossible seat, waiting there, empty but occupied. I stayed with his truck until first light, pacing the muddy shoulder, trying to convince myself it was all some misperception, a trick of the fog and exhaustion. When the sun rose, it painted the mountains in shades of muted orange and gray. The fog clung to the valleys like smoke in an abandoned chimney. And still, there was no sign of him. No footprints except mine. No sign of struggle. Eventually, I had to drive back to the nearest town to alert someone. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see Tom's rig following, or worse, some indication that he had vanished into the mist. At the station, officers were polite but skeptical. "We get calls like this a lot," one said, not unkindly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Logging roads are long, twisting, and isolated," he explained. "People fall asleep, crash, wander off. Nothing strange usually happens." They agreed to send a team out at first light to search. I drove back with them to where I'd found him. The truck was still there, idling, fog still hugging the tree line, looking exactly the same as the night before. The officers tried the doors, checked the cab, no one. Seatbelts still fastened across the passenger seat. I remember the officer muttering something about mechanical quirks, maybe the seatbelt tensioners locking up. But I knew that belt had been tight around something, or someone, unseen. My gut told me there was no mistake. Over the next few weeks, search parties scoured the woods. We combed the hollows, checked every logging trail, every abandoned cabin along the ridge. Nothing. Not a footprint, a scrap of clothing, or a sign that anyone had walked into or out of those forests that night. The mountains kept their secret, silent and impenetrable. Sometimes, at night, I dream of the passenger seat. I see it through the fog. Empty, but pressing against my arm as I drive. I wake sweating, the smell of wet pine lingering in the room, the tight weight of a seatbelt pressing into my ribs. Friends tell me I'm imagining it, that I should let it go. I can't. Even now, when I drive those same roads, I glance at the passenger seat, half expecting it to move, half expecting it to be waiting. There's a detail I didn't notice the first time. A journal tucked under the passenger seat, leather cracked and damp. It wasn't his handwriting. I never opened it fully. Just a glimpse of faint scrawls, lists of names, dates, and phrases like "they watch" and "always seatbelted." I shoved it back under the seat, but the image sticks in my mind. Whoever, or whatever, was there had left a mark that I can't erase. I quit the logging runs after that. I moved away from the hollows, away from winding ridges and fog-choked valleys. But the mountains have a memory. Every time it rains, every time fog settles low on the ridges, I can hear the idle of a truck somewhere in the distance, doors locked, seatbelt fastened. I can't stop thinking about it, about him, about what or who was in the passenger seat that night. I tell the story now because I have to, even if no one believes it. Because the mountains take their secrets seriously. They don't need to scream, they just wait. And sometimes, if you drive late enough, they'll make you notice,